Hey there, and welcome to the Death to Vanilla podcast. I'm Stephen Burkhart, the host of the show and the founder of Burkhart Creative Agency. If you're looking for fresh ideas and tactical advice on how to take your marketing to the next level, you have come to the right place. We interview industry professionals who teach us how to courageously create, boldly innovate, and experiment, and they teach you to do the same. Now, we are super grateful that you're here and watching, but if you're looking to get off your phone and have a little less screen time, we have an audio-only version of the show, and we have links to that show in the description below. Without further ado, let's get into the show.
Wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but right here, make sure you walk and your talk is constant.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Death to Vanilla podcast. As you can see behind me, I'm constantly changing my background, not necessarily on purpose. All of the places that I've normally been recording have been unfortunately snagged from me as I've been recording in different rooms in my house, and they're starting to get used for other things. So thank you guys as you have patience in dealing with my constant ever-changing background. But I am super excited to have on the show today James Nguyen with Inflection Media. Him and I think, are going to be pretty kindred spirits when it comes to what we believe is actually going to work for businesses nowadays. And so, I think that it's exciting for me to have some perspective from the same industry. Like normally I'm always looking outside of the industry for new, fresh ideas, but it'd be really cool to hear what he has to say, especially since you are clear on the other side of the world, quite literally, out in Australia. And so welcome to the show, James. And I'd like for you to just spend a little bit of time bragging. That's highly encouraged on this show. And so just brag a little bit about what you've been up to, what you've been building, and share with us some of those things.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. So yeah, I'm on the other side of the world. I'm in Australia, so I'm manning this side of the world for you and doing like the groundwork and figuring out what's working in APAC. And yeah, you can do the same on your side. But yeah, I obviously work with a lot of clients in the States, so I have my finger to the pulse with it all. But my story, I've been in business pretty much my whole life. I've never worked for anybody else. I've just been building my own brands, building my own businesses. And so, I've been fortunate from a pretty young age to have some really decent success, which just catapulted my own personal brand. So I think it was by 21, I was a contributing writer for Forbes. They found me from a lot of keynote presentations I was doing, a lot of like YouTube videos I was doing around the startup scene, around the science behind virality, the psychology behind virality and habits. And yeah, I became a contributing writer for them pretty early on. And then from there, I just started to build up my own media brand through the other ventures I was doing. So I was in the tech space for a very, very long time. And I still have a company in the tech space. And just through that, I just built up my own credibility from that. And so I became the talking head on CNBC, on Sky News, on ABC, just commentating on a few of the disruptive tech trends. And what I really saw there was that, okay, building a media brand and building out really powerful content that's different, that catapults you, right? That actually has a real tangible influence on how people actually see you, how much people trust you because of your credibility that you can actually show, not just tell people, right? Because if they've seen you speak in the media and they actually are listening to what you're saying, it's like, okay, cool. Like now you actually have exposure. And so you get this yourself, Steve, in terms of your clients and I'm sure your ethos, right? But it's the whole adage of, tree falls in the woods, but if no one's there to hear it, did the tree really fall, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, say you have an amazing thing to say you can create amazing content or, you really tangibly help people or serve other companies. If no business, no market actually knows about you, then yeah, do you really help people, right? And so it was that kind of epiphany that I had when I was building up my own brands and like, okay, cool. Like, because people were able to see what I could do in different companies around tech mainly, then we were able to just build out our own notoriety and build up our own brand. And so, yeah, that's really influenced a lot of how I think about business and how I think about the world now. And are you familiar with Naval Ravikant? Founder of AngelList. Yeah, he has a famous tweet storm from about 2-3 years ago now. Long story short, he talks about like the 4 types of leverage. Like the first 2 types or the oldest 2 forms of leverage are capital and labor. So you have money, you're a hedge fund, you invest in something, put more money behind it, you're going to make more money. And then you got labor, which is, you don't have the time to do something, then you hire a team, and then suddenly you can do more, right? Well, the two newest forms of labor are code, which is, you write a line of code, you create a platform like Spotify or Facebook or anything. And, however many people use it, give or take, it's still the same line of code, right? So it's infinitely scalable.
Right.
And then you got the other side of leverage, which is media, right? So this podcast that we're producing now will take us, an hour, post-production, et cetera, then that's it. Whether one person listens to it or 100,000, 1 million, however many people listen to it, you and I, we don't have to spend any more time on it, right?
Right.
So our time is limited, but the scalability is unlimited. So it's that form of leverage that I really wanted to double down on. And that's why, I still have a company in the tech space, mainly based around AI, creating code leverage. And then we have Inflection Media, which is just based around creating media leverage. And so at a super high level, Stephen, that's pretty much my background.
That's amazing. Now yeah, for me, my whole journey in getting into it was just realizing that like so many social media platforms were beginning to incorporate video as like the main thing, or beginning to slide into that, right? So we see that with Instagram, where it started as a photo platform, and then it began to incorporate video in posts, and then stories, and then reels, and now they're changing the algorithm to favor videos even more, and so you see like even and like I don't know when it actually happened, but I discovered the other day that you could actually upload videos to Twitter. And just because I just don't use Twitter that often, I'm not like an avid user of it. I'm just really starting to get into it more now because I've been more of an Instagram guy. And able to like full on upload videos to Twitter. And like that used to be like only 160 characters. And so it's been wild to see that and realize that like, okay, if businesses want to show up, like they've got to get some like visual content going, especially video, that's able to leverage those spaces. And just on like almost on the opposite spectrum, it's kind of interesting that you talk about PR. And I'd love to dig into a little bit more of that, of how that's affected you as a personal brand, because there was a post I was reading that basically talked about that social media is like the lowest form of credibility on like a long list, right? Whereas like showing up on TV still matters like a lot. And so it's really cool because like, at least for me, and I'd love to hear your side of this, is like social media has been a great way for me to try to like figure out my message, because I'm just like constantly creating content. But then my hope is that, I haven't had the privilege of that you have of being on TV. And so I hope that when I do, I feel very prepared and very well thought out. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, for you on your personal brand side, like how it is that you got some of that PR coverage. Is that something you developed on social media? Was it just from your businesses specifically? And how have you continued to leverage that moving forward? I know it's a big question.
No, it's a great question. So I see it in a couple of phases, right? Right now, for sure, there's still a lot of credibility. There's still a lot of social currency of being on these main platforms. And that's because like a lot of the trust is still centralized into a number of publications, right? So whether you talk about New York Times, whether you talk about Forbes, whether you talk about, CNBC, whatever it is. So there's a lot of trust imbued with being associated with these platforms. So being on TV right now through PR, like that's still super helpful, because people look to these brands and say, oh, okay, like it's kind of the halo effect, right? Without having known you, they're like, well, okay, there's a filtering process. So if you have been invited on to speak on these TV shows, then that says something about your credibility, right? Yeah. And so right now, as we still centralize a lot of the authority and social proof to these platforms, it's still super helpful. How has it been helpful for me? Well, it's kind of how I've seen it is, building up, and it's the serendipity of it all as well, right? So Forbes reached out to me. And so like that was a beautiful serendipity where they saw something that I put out into the world. I put something out on YouTube, and I was doing a lot of conferences, and they reached out. I had a good relationship with them, came on as a contributing writer. And then I was, privileged to be able to interview some of the biggest companies in the world, founders of Canva. I've interviewed people from Instagram, from Dropbox, from, a whole gamut, right? So a number of unicorns. And
VaynerMedia, I saw that one. I was a little jealous of that one. So that's cool.
Yeah. So it's been an amazing ride with that, right? And so what really just happened is I was able to really just, it's kind of like a bat signal to the world, right? It's like, okay, well, I've interviewed these high profile companies, like then that has an associated effect with my credibility. Because being in a room, and I've been in a room with a number of the unicorn founders, right? So being in a room on a one-on-one call with a lot of these founders, a lot of these companies, then start to imbue me with a level of social credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens over time is it just starts to stack. That is literally your living portfolio. That is your living resume, right? Instead of having to, again, it's just show, don't tell. Instead of having to say, oh, I'm trustworthy, I know my stuff, or, you know, I'm a good writer or whatever it is. It's like, okay, you can just go check out my stuff. You can just check out my articles. You can check out my column, you know? And so that was really, really beneficial. And then, so what happens is when there is an upcoming trend, so I commentated a lot on the blockchain space. And so when there is an upcoming trend and I have a track record, which is really, Stephen, what like a lot of clients need to build. Like when we're talking about content or talking about personal brand, it's like, you just need to build an online track record, right? So whether that track record is, you know, you're building it on social media because people can go on, see, you know, the sorts of things you've talked about or whatever it might be. You're just building a track record. So when let's call it the wave comes and it's like, okay, here's an opportunity being presented to you. Well, what are the people going to look for? You know, when we're talking about, you know, pure PR on CNBC, on, you know, Sky, who are they going to look to? Well, they're going to look to, okay, whose credibility in this space that we can trust to get on TV and actually commentate on this, who can actually speak on this stuff. And so for me, it's like, yeah, the opportunity for PR didn't happen overnight. It happened in the years prior to that, building up a literal like online, you know, proof, online resume, let's call it, of all the different things that I can actually speak on and I actually have credibility on.
Sure. Well, so one thing that leads me to is one thing that I've been kind of ringing the bell for recently, and I love to see where you fall on the spectrum. Is there's always that argument on about content online, about quality and quantity, right? And so the idea is if you don't have enough quantity, that like you're just you're just buried by the quantity that's being created by others. But then my argument on the flip side of it is once someone finds you, like they actually need to find something worth watching or reading, right? Like you actually get noticed, cool. But like you said, like Forbes isn't going to contact you if they find you and then your content's total garbage. And so how do you think about and balance quantity and quality, or is that something you just don't struggle with?
No, that's a great question, right? And it's kind of an age-old debate when it comes to content marketing.
Sure.
For me, like quality's such a subjective one, number one. Like my huge disclaimer would actually be what you think is quality may actually be a red herring, right? Because it's maybe be your own bias. Because what you think is quality content may actually not resonate with a particular market. Right. So it might be, you know, the best created videos. It may be, you know, you're talking about something you're super passionate about and you're like, this video was amazing. Like I'm so hyped about this. But at the end of the day, you put it to the market and then the market says, yeah, it's a great video. It's been well produced, but I actually don't care what you're talking about. Right. And so quality, like what I would encourage everybody to question is just really their own evaluation of their own quality, right? And just understand how deeply biased, and it's not a bad thing, it's not a judgment call, it's just like an inherent bias, right? How deeply biased we are and what our blind spots are to actually understand what quality, quote unquote, content is relative to your market, right? And so when you divorce yourself from the assumption that everything you make is quality just because you assume it's quality, then you're really faced with a decision, right? How do you figure out what's quality to your market? The way to do that is through rapid experimentation, because everything I put out, right, is a guess. You know, Gary Vee talks a lot about this in terms of his own content, and the same would be true for you, even. Like anything we put out is still a guess that the market's going to care about it, right? And maybe, you know, based on other people in the industry, they might like this topic. But the way you say it, it could be, you know, through the video you create, you know, your voice, it could be, you know, all these different variables. They might say, this is freaking awesome. This is better than anything else I've seen. Or they might say, no, I don't really care about this. Right. And so for me, quality, you actually need to determine that through rapid experimentation. So quality for me is actually determined through a feedback loop that comes from quantity. Does that make sense? So yes. Like by actually rapidly going out and creating a lot of different content, like you have to have some baseline of, you know, knowledge or expertise, right? If you're speaking about, I don't know, the insurance industry, you've never necessarily done anything in the insurance space or anything like that, right? You have no credibility to back you up. Well, there's a disclaimer there in terms of, the quality that you can create, right? But if you really back yourself in and you're creating quality content as a baseline, it's informative, it can actually help people. For me, at the end of the day, are you sharing knowledge? Are you sharing content that the people listening to it, reading it, whatever, can't get easy access to? If the answer is yes, then for me, there's a baseline of quality there. Then really everything else is around positioning, is around communication, it's around, do they resonate with the message, right? And so that is one of the key variables to quote unquote quality content relative to an audience. That's at least what I think.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It's, so much of this is objective. So yeah, it's, no, I think that's a good, I think that's a good thing to remember. And since I know I struggle with that because my background's videography. And so I do definitely look at like image quality and like how good does the camera move and how good is the audio, like all those things matter a great deal to me. But then when you think about it, you're like, oh, like, actually, if it wasn't helpful for the other person, like they like literally don't care. And that hurts my videography heart, but that makes sense when it comes to content. And so, just having that helpfulness. Like there was one guy that I listened to that was talking about like taking content in the next level. And he was talking about like, oh, like if you make a video about, athletes that you should, one of the, the things you should do as an athlete is drink more water. Well, that's like kind of vanilla. It's not super helpful. But then he's like, but then if you do like research and you look up like how much water do athletes that are training for the Olympics drink? Well, then you've got something really interesting and helpful that people can then take and be inspired by and follow, as opposed to just something generic. And so that to me, I guess, would be like the difference between like content and then quality content, right?
Totally.
And then, so yeah. Anyway, so okay. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like, for the personal branding sense, like how have you like really separated your personal brand as like its own website, its own entity, its own content, or is that just something that happens to be kind of like you're the face of your businesses and that is kind of a leverage as a personal brand? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so it would be the latter. So I have a decent following on LinkedIn. I'm the face of, I create a lot of the content we do right now, a lot of, the quote unquote thought leadership, even though that's not a term I love, but a lot of the content I just don't like it because it's so contrite. But a lot of the content we actually put out around like the thinking and the meta principles and first principles of like media about brand building and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm recording a lot of that stuff. So just by extension of that, you see my face, for the better or worse. You see my face a little bit more.
They're hearing your Australian accent. That's really the only thing. I mean, on this side of the world, I mean, I love it.
Yeah, it's a face for radio. We'll keep my voice over there.
No, come on.
So in terms of my personal brand, it's just like, on LinkedIn, a lot of the stuff I'm posting is around, what we just do at Inflection. It's just because I really care about it, right? Mm-hmm. The thing when I really double down on brand or my personal brand, like, and this is more an ideological approach anyway, because the things I care about in life, for me, there's not really too much of a distinction between business and life. There's just life, right? It's just how we spend our time. It's what we do. And so my personal brand will be an extension of the different things I like. And I have an eclectic intersection, let's say, of different interests. And so, so for me, there's a number of things in my personal brand people might know me for, right? Whether it's my, poetry, whether it's around what I talk about Inflection, whether it's around, my life in tech, like all of these different things people just associate with my personal brand. And so, I don't actively go out and, have my own website and it's like jamesnguyen.com or anything. I don't. So if you go to jamesnguyen.com, that's not me. I don't have any of those things, but it's just like, when I think about like things, I'm not even that active on social media myself, to be honest. But when I think about the things that I do post, it's the things I actually care about, right? And so for me, that personal brand's just built up on that. And so people just get to know me. And so that's the other thing I think about as well. Like whether it's around content, whether it's around brand, for me, it's actually just around business. Because again, business is under just the umbrella of life. For me, business is all just relationships, and relationships is built on trust, right? So trust is just built on getting to know someone. Like you and I got to know each other for an hour. So, I know you better than someone I've never met before,
That's fair.
like, yeah, it's just a pure hour, right? Versus somebody, it could be, my family that I've known for decades, right? So there's just going to be a different level of trust if, my family and they've shown up for me, for years and years and years. I just implicitly have trust with them. And so when I think about my own personal brand, well, really, when I just think about brands in general, it's just around, well, how are you building trust with your audience? And for me, in terms of my personal brand, like I'm not going out and building a personal brand for a specific audience. I'm just building content and brands around what I care about. So the people that actually resonate with me and want to build a relationship with the authentic me, well, they're just going to come to me, right? Versus, building a brand for a specific market could be, you could be in an industry. So you're creating content that's very specific to your target audience, right? So it's still about building a relationship and building trust, but then it's slightly more intentional because you're like, oh, you actually may be in the insurance space, right? And you're trying to build, you're trying to build out content that's going to be resonant with consumers of your insurance product, right? And so your content is going to be way more targeted. So that's how I think about my personal brand. It's like, it's just who I am. So I'm not like, how intentional am I about that? Well, really the only ambition there is just to be more authentically me, and then just keep putting out content that I resonate with.
Right. Well, I think so. This kind of leads me to like literally, it's so funny that you're mentioning some of this stuff because I literally had a conversation right before you and I jumped on the call where I was, kind of thinking out loud with some of these things. So I would love to hear from you. There's this idea of, the idea of being authentic online, the idea of sharing about yourself, and for for you, it seems like those lines are pretty blurry, in like a good way. But how is it? Is it just that you feel comfortable with only sharing like parts of yourself and that still feels authentic to you? Because at the end of the day, like I'm assuming there's a whole lot more to you than just what you're doing for business, right? There's family life, there's, personal interests, hobbies and stuff like that. So, obviously like, or even a variety of business things that don't necessarily match up as far as messaging and stuff like that. So how does one go about kind of filtering through some of those things so that you're not like, so what am I trying to say? There's like in marketing and business, you're always trying to kind of get known for like one thing. You know what I mean? Because like, it's so hard to get known for lots of things. It's this idea that like, if I try to shove my finger through a wall, or if I try to shove a knife through the wall, like the knife's going to be easier because I'm applying the same amount of force to a small area, right? And so when you look at like getting known out in the world, it's like, okay, if I'm too broad, it makes it harder for me to break through because people don't know if I stand for business, or if I stand for drinking coffee, or if I stand for travel vacation, or if I stand for entrepreneurship. So how does someone kind of like declutter their many personal interests and their vastness as a human being into something that can be consumable online?
Yeah, totally. It makes perfect sense. I totally get it as well. There's a couple layers for me to this answer. I think number one is just to understand intention, right? Like if you're trying to do it and build a brand to like make money, right? And it's different intentions, right? Some people, for them, personal brand is just creative. It's just expressive, right? It could be an art form. It's like, oh, I just want to be me all the way down. And it's like, great. Versus somebody, they could be building a brand for a business where the intention behind it is a little different. And they're like, oh, we need to make money in the next 12 months versus a brand that's like, oh, I'm trying to make it a change in the world for the next 10 years. Right. It's very, very different in that sense. And so, there's trade-offs there, right? If you're trying to look at the more practical, the more tactical, it's like, the whole land and expand, you niche down first, create an audience that actually resonate with your stuff. And the reason that you niche down is so you can actually understand that target market, but they can also understand how you can tangibly help them, right? The whole like create value, help people. It's like, I air quote that because it's just so cliched. It's obviously true, but it's just so cliched, right? And so for me, like what actually happens there is, again, it comes back to a relationship, right? To be able to speak to that audience about something that they care about, well, they have to understand you, right? And you have to build a relationship with them. In terms of the line of, where is too vulnerable, like that, for me, it's just like, it's up to the person, in the same way you and I are speaking right now, even if we're speaking as purely mates and we're not speaking about content marketing or anything like that, like I may not talk to you about, an intimate thing in my personal life, right? I'm not talk to you about, what's happening with my sisters, for instance, in the first few times we chat. And that doesn't mean I'm being disingenuous with you. It's just like, okay, there's a certain thing that might not resonate with you based on how I get to know you. But there might be other people who are like, all right, here's what happened with my auntie. Here's what happened with my sister. And they'll just tell you right off the bat. But that's just who they are. And so for me, it's just like, to take a step back from that, when someone's building a personal brand, they just need to understand who they are first and foremost. And I think when people have, part of them feels really challenged with the idea of needing to declutter their different interests, and they're like, oh, I have a number of eclectic interests and all that stuff. For me, that's actually just a lagging indicator that maybe they don't have clarity for themselves of who they stand for and what their values actually are. Because in this conversation, I can be like fully 100% authentic and transparent with you in all the things that we're talking about here. And like, that's just me. I'm just showing up as me, talking about like content, talking about like business, right? We could easily switch and we could talk about philosophy. We could talk about spirituality, and I could still be just as authentic. It's not, I'm reading the room. That's not necessarily the right topics we're going to go down all the way down, but it doesn't mean I'm being disingenuous. So in the same way you have a conversation with someone, you're not going to tell them your life story all the fucking time. Sorry if you're not allowed to swear. But yeah, you're going to meet people and you're going to have a conversation with them in the same way you're going to meet customers and you're going to have a conversation with them about something that they would actually care about. Because then it's the whole philosophy of, are you speaking for you, or are you speaking for your, customers or the people listening, right? And it's the same thing with writing. When you try to write for yourself versus write for the reader, like, it's a very different intention. And so, yeah, it's just picking where you want to position yourself. Are you doing this, customer centric, going for like an Amazon thing, and then you're really iterating that way? Or are you going the other way and just being like, oh, I am really, really bold. This is what I stand for. More like an Elon Musk. This is what I stand for. I'm going to go for it. Hell leather. And if people resonate it with it, amazing. If people don't, amazing. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Versus, okay, I'm going to make something for the market and just be so damn customer centric that nobody else is going to know these people as much as I do, because I'm just listening to them all the time.
Right. Well, thank you for answering that. I think that these kind of thoughts and things to figure out are so important, because these are like the underlying, this is like the blood flow of what like all the other decisions come out of. You know what I mean? Like, you don't just sit down and make a video. Like, you got to sit down and think about, like, why am I making this video? Like, how does this fit into what I'm doing, what I'm trying to accomplish? Is it genuine to the headway I'm trying to make in a specific way? Is it speaking to the right people? Like, all those other things. I feel like these are like the foundational things that you kind of have to sit down and figure out, especially if you're venturing out into something new. And so I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. I think it's super important. It's not necessarily tactical, but I think it is like a little philosophical, and it's important to figure out.
Sure.
Yeah. So you brought up poetry earlier, and when your team had reached out to me, they mentioned that was like a pretty a big change maker in what you were doing, as far as how you thought about marketing and communication, stuff like that. So I don't know a whole lot about the story. So if you want to just unpack that a little bit, that'd be amazing. But I know it has to do with spoken word poetry. So
yeah.
So yeah, if you want to talk about that, if that was a pretty defining moment for you in your career.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's poetry is just a really big part of my life now. And so it weaves its way through just how I see the world, how I experience the world, how I experience business as well. And so, like, if you think about writing poetry, like, I don't know if you've written much poetry or anything like that, but it's really just around like word selection, right? So being able to say more with less words, right? Because you have a finite amount of attention. In the same way you're writing lyrics for a song, like, that's still poetic. Right. And so when I really have, when I'm writing poetry, it's like, becoming really intentional with these things and understanding there's a lot of profundity in simplicity, right? And, I didn't even intend for that to rhyme, but, the idea behind it is you can say a lot with few words. And the same thing is true with content, right? Through minimalism, through actually taking things away and subtraction, you're actually able to communicate way more. And so, poetry is just a really big part of my life. Like, my whole poetry brand is around business and life through poetry. So I write poetry around like different first principles from business, right? Whether it's media leverage, whether it's branding, anything like that. And for me, it's really interesting because like, that's really authentic to me. Like that's an expression of my soul. That's an expression of who I am. And so for me, the brands that I resonate with most are the ones that actually have real personality. And it's really difficult for people to replicate this idea of like poetry around business or poetry around, all the things I talk about, unless they're actually really into poetry, because otherwise it's really difficult for them to spend as much time as me doing it, because I actually love doing it. So, again, another quote from Novell is like, find what feels like work to others, but feels like play to you. Like I can write poetry all day, but other people, it might be really difficult. And so for me, my true personality is going to come out in the poetry I write around the topics that I want to speak about. And, business is a huge part of my life. It is a really artistic expression for me. And so, I write a lot of poems around business as well. And so when people are hearing poetry around business, like it really is like this uniqueness. It's this tripwire where they're like, oh, these words rhyme, but I'm learning stuff about how to help my business. Like this is new. And it's like, it's not intentionally, oh, I'm only doing it for that reason. It's just, oh, this is the expression of who I authentically am. And when you meet people, like, I don't know your experience with it, Stephen, but like for me, definitely the sorts of people, whether you're in a, not now with COVID, but like when you're at parties or anything like that, and you're meeting someone new and someone just has like a really magnetic energy, right? Like often for me, it's like the people who are most secure in their own skin. And are comfortable saying whatever they want to say, speaking about whatever they want to speak about, because it's just them. They don't have to put on a front. And like that for me really extends to this idea of brand. And for me, my poetry brand, or really just my personal brand, because that's an extension of it, is like, okay, what's me all the way down? And I'm like, I love writing words that rhyme. Like it's just really fun for me. And so when I'm doing that and combining it with like actually reciting it and performing it, it's just become such a big part of my life, and how it's really informed us at Inflection. It's like, minimalism, minimalist media, and being so intentional with the ways that we create our pieces of content. That's been really informed by poetry, because poetry is unique in every single verse, in every single line. In the same way, every piece of content we create for a specific brand is unique, right? Because we're still telling a story. You're telling a story through a poem. You're telling a story through visual design, through video, like what you do, Stephen. And that's been a huge influence of how I lead our team, and how it really informs my thinking around building unique brands, because it's really about building authentic brands.
How do you guys sit there and discover the personality of the brand of like a client that you're working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's two layers to that. The first one is like, there's an intuitive feeling of, who represents their brand. Maybe they're a startup and they have, a face of the brand. Maybe they have a founder or multiple founders, right? You really get to know them. And you're like, okay, you get to know their personality in the same way. Like, how would I get to know your personality? It's like, well, I'll speak to you. I'll get to know you. I'll literally feel you on this call, right? Like we've been speaking for an hour. I get a read of your personality, your idiosyncrasies, all these different things, right? Things you like, the things you don't, how you position your brand, how you position your company, what you care about. And so like just having a conversation with you first and foremost will just give me an intuitive read of where you position yourself in the market. But then it's also just understanding or where you position your brand. But then the other one, to understand your personality, it's like, okay, your personality is maybe this right now in the market. What do you actually want to express? Like, what do you actually, what's your mission? Like, what's the big thing? Like if you are uninhibited, like if there were no roadblocks in the way and you could be as big as you possibly could be, well, what does that look like? Because then we can actually start to marry up. Like, where are you right now? Maybe it's like, where are you right now tactically and practically? But, ideologically, again, I'm not intending for any of these things to rhyme, but it's just coming out. See, it's just an expression.
It's because what you do every single day.
It's just what I do. I can't control it. I can't control it. So yeah, but ideologically, maybe you are very clear on where you, like who your personality is, and the market just hasn't married up. Your brand just hasn't married up. So it's like, okay, what are the practical things we can help you with? Or maybe you're still going through the exploratory phase where your brand is going through its own existential, fork in the road, where it's like, oh, what do we stand for? Well, that's a very different conversation. And then it's more around asking, and encouraging certain lines of questions in certain lines of answers for the brand or the CEO or the marketing manager, or the CMO, whoever it is, to start to tease out what the actual values are and what the personality is. Because when people are still trying to quote unquote find themselves, let's talk about teenagers trying to find themselves, trying to find their own personality, trying to find their character. The more they actually feel through these things and experience different things, the more they actually understand, the more data points they have of what their, character or personality actually is. Well, the same thing, you just compress it in terms of building a brand, right? You just give them different data points. You ask them questions so they can give you data points. So you're really just a guide for them to experience their own truest personality. And then it's our role. And it's the same with you when you're creating content with your company. And then it's our role to actually communicate that to the world. So as long as they have clarity around it, all right, next step is us. So yeah, they're the kind of 2 stages I think through.
Yeah, I guess when you explain it that way, like correlate it to like human beings growing up, a lot of businesses when they first start are kind of like in that teenager phase.
Yeah,
where they
totally.
are trying to like learn and grow. And I guess the thing that pops in my mind is like I remember watching a video back when they first launched the Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the like SUV that they did, and it's just interesting to hear them talking about like the Rolls-Royce brand, because there's such a heritage. They've been around forever. Like they know what they stand for. They know what they're making their cars for. They know what they're what it is that they're trying to accomplish out in the world and what they represent as a company. And so there's like really like this heritage to what they're doing that they can, someone from the outside world can come in and really understand what it is that they stand for. And yeah, with these new businesses, it's like, it feels like a teenager where it's like, oh, like, I like this. Now I like this. Now I want to stand for this. Now I don't care about that anymore. And it's just like, it's kind of interesting. And I feel like, people have to be like okay with embracing that process and realizing it's a creative process and it just takes time to work through, and you can't really force it. Like it's got to happen. Like you can't force a teenager to grow up. Like they have to kind of discover it on their own. And I feel like businesses really operate the same kind of way.
Yeah, I love it. Like I know we were kind of live feeding and that analogy came out. And so yeah, you can kind of just see the different stages, right? And people grow up way faster. You'll see people in their 20s operate like they're in their 50s. There's just implicit wisdom in them. So in the same way, a business finds their niche, finds their personality, finds their groove, and they're like, okay, this is what we stand for. That's it. We're going to build on this. It's not to say you won't iterate and change, but it's like, yeah, here's the base plate. Here's the actual foundation of what we stand for and our values. Let's build it on top of this foundation. And then when they're able to do that, it's like, oh, it's like you meet, a wise old soul and you're like, oh, you know what you're doing. It's the same thing. And you can also have businesses who have been around for a number of years, still flailing about, trying to figure out what they're trying to do. And so, yeah.
I'd venture to say at that point, that's a leadership problem.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I'm sitting here cracking up because like you keep rhyming about stuff, and all I can think about is this guy must be a monster on Twitter, because if you're just putting these things together, like yeah, it's got to be perfect for you. I know. So I guess more of like a personal question then, because of the fact that, because you have, how many businesses do you actually have personally that like you've like either founded or have like a really important role in?
Active right now?
Yeah.
So I run 2 companies right now. One's around AI technology, one's around media.
And then what about your the poetry business?
Yeah, so for me, if you count that as a separate business, then I have 3. But like the poetry business is more, it's not even a business. It's more, poetry is just a really big part of my life. So yeah, it's the brands we build. Like, yeah, I do poems all the time, but it's funny because I don't even think of that as quote unquote a business. But yeah, it's a huge part of my life, building brands for that, putting out, have email newsletters and all that stuff. But that's just something that's really just who I am. But formally, when I think about, what are my businesses, it's Inflection Media and Inflection AI. Yep. But JQN is its own thing as well.
Right. Well, because I wonder, because I feel like that is, I know it kind of can become a tricky game of like time and energy and resources and stuff like that. But I feel like in some level, like when I think about the different interests I have, like all I can think of is like, I'm going to have to start a half a dozen businesses. because
Totally.
there is like no one thing that I want to do for like the rest of my life till I die. And so like for me, like I do enjoy video, and I do enjoy a marketing company a great deal, but ultimately I really love training and empowering and leading people. Like that's what gets me most, like the most exciting thing about my business is uh my content producer, Rylin, is like the one who like edits all the stuff. She'll be editing this podcast and stuff like that. Like her growing and like doing amazing things is more exciting to me than like almost any amount of money I can make with my business. And so
Amazing.
for me, it's like, I don't know if like a marketing agency is going to be the thing I do for the rest of my life, in which case I'm just going to have more businesses as different expressions of the interests I have. And so I was wondering if is that kind of why you went down that route? Is it just a pursuit of multiple income streams, or was this kind of like these different businesses kind of a way for you to like express yourself in different ways, still
Yeah, for
exercising
sure.
that business muscle? But you know what I mean? Like, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, like it's not even like a greed thing. It's like at the end of the day, like you only have so much time. So like
Yep.
sometimes you got to turn things you enjoy doing into businesses so you could justify spending the time on it.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So, yeah, for me, yeah, on one side, for sure, it allows me to scratch multiple itches just because,
Yeah.
yeah, I like businesses, and Gary Vee talks about this too. Like business is a game. Like I like the game, man. That's why I like building brands, because it's so creative. It allows me to go from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. And that's really fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fun for my team, and I'm blessed to have an incredible team. And so, yeah, tech's been such a huge part of my life for pretty much my whole career. And so, yeah, just naturally, I have a disposition to that as well. And I really have like let's call it a deep calling to be involved in that, and involved in kind of the movements that are more disruptive, because I just like the scalability of things. I like leverage. Like that idea is really interesting to me. And so, yeah, media and technology, I guess, is the big umbrellas under which, I have interests. But then within those things, when you think about it, right, like, so we're building our own IP, right, around tech. So that allows me to scratch my itch. Maybe I'm not in the weeds every single day like I used to be, but it allows me to be invested in that actual domain. So I'm like, oh, cool. Like that's really interesting. I need to stay abreast of, the latest AI technology, in the same way on the other side, under the media brand, I'm like, okay, well, again, if we look very high level, ideologically, I believe these two umbrellas, let's say, are going to be the most important moving forwards. And there's going to be things that fall under that. And so with media, it's like, there's always changing media landscapes, but it's like building media brands is really important. So JQN, my poetry brand, it's like, well, that's still under media, right? We're still building out a media brand around my poetry. And so, and then when we start to actually build our own media brands, which we're doing in and of itself as well, that allows me to scratch my itch across different fields. So hypothetically, you were talking about like teaching and, coaching and things like that, and personal development, or like professional development. So something like that, if I had a similar itch, then yeah, I could have a team working on that, and I could be invested in that on a high level. And at any time that I want to dive deeper into that, then I do, And so we also do a lot of pro bono work for social activists, not-for-profits as well. And so, that's really important to me, because that's a huge part of my life. Like that's a huge part of my life. Right. And, whether it's work with trauma healing, whether it's work with, healing past trauma and things like that. Like, yeah, one of the companies we work with right now, Spiritual Fight Club, it's like, yeah, there's a huge mission there to heal masculinity. Right. And to really work through a lot of like trauma that men have gone through. And so like, that's a cause that is so close to my heart. And so, I'm a huge part of that organization. And it's like, these are the sorts of things that are like, again, once you build up leverage in your life, then you're gifted the currency of, the currency of choice and optionality. Right. And so, that's been so important to me, because I do care about things outside, maybe just one siloed niche, in a vertical. Like I really care about those things, but you're right. Time is limited. So I can't be spending my time in every single thing, but is there a way that I can powerfully move missions forwards in the different areas that I'm interested in, while also still being able to, go into them and have the choice to go deeper into one field or deeper into another when I want to scratch that itch deeper. And so it's not even scratch the itch. It's like, for me, it's around my ideological alignment. Where do I feel most called? And so, whether it's the idea of spirituality, whether it's the idea of, pushing media forwards, media leverage, whether it's the idea of tech leverage, whether it's the idea of poetry, like for me, they're the sorts of things that really define who I am. And so, that's how I kind of, let's call it allocate my time or my personal energetic resources.
Yeah, absolutely. They are quite limited, unfortunately. Yep. And depending on what personality type you are, I find that there are some things that exhaust me much faster than others. And so it can be challenging to do everything that you feel passionate about. For one, it's just not realistic on a daily basis, but if we're quoting more things that Gary Vee talks about, since you seem to follow him a little bit, it's just the idea of redefining what balance looks like in your life. And it doesn't mean you do something every single day. It could mean that you do something a lot for 1 week every other month or something like that. And that's that's okay. 'Cause at the end of the day, like, you're a provider, you've got to make money and pay for the house that's over your head and your lifestyle. But at the end of the day, like, that isn't the only thing you care about, and you got to make space for that. And sometimes that isn't daily or even weekly. And that's okay. So that's super cool. Honestly, a lot of those things sound pretty interesting. I'm actually kind of curious about to see what that spiritual fight club is. I feel like unhealthy masculinity is at the root of a lot, if not 90% of all the problems in the world. So I think it's super important. That's one of those things that I don't get to spend a lot of time with, but is near dear to my heart as well. So I'd love for us to chat offline about that. But so there's two questions I have. Well, one question I have, but I wanted to give you a chance because I don't know how long they are, but if you have like a poem you're ready to rock, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, cool. Let's do one. Let's go with a more business-based one.
Okay.
In line with what we're kind of talking about. So
I'm so ready. I'm super excited. I've literally never heard anything like this before, and so I'm legit excited about this.
Okay, so this one is called Media Leverage. If you have an important thing to say, you must say it. If you have an important way to help, you must do it. The problem for so many companies is that they won't commit, admit, or submit to the fact that they don't know how. Not how to create value, but how to share it. Share it to as many people as possible. Powerfully position themselves positively by publishing content that scales. The hurdle is companies are too scared content fails before they even put it out there, out to their market, customers, or prospects. There's so many aspects that they're trying to control, conflating prediction with conviction, which leads to restriction and contradiction of truly scaling. By not building a media brand for your company, you are choosing passivity over proactivity, which will consolidate your market fragility rather than credibility. That's why so few companies have truly leveraged media, because they're looking for guaranteed results in a made-up encyclopedia. And that doesn't exist. What exists, though, is an inflection point where you need to appoint someone to cleverly create content lest you disappoint your customers, because that's what they all want. Whether you like it or not, you still must confront that online content is the currency that creates credibility. Customers compare competitors by contrasting their content. That's how they evaluate which companies they can trust, which companies know what they're doing. That's literally what they're doing, reviewing and viewing whether you are legit, whether you can bring them value, and whether they can benefit from what you're offering. Because the mantra online is show, not tell. So the more you try to sell without a content carousel, the more you will smell of illegitimacy. If someone you just met asks you to buy from them, can you see that online it's the same thing? If you don't have ongoing content, your customers can't get to know you. Company anonymity for credibility is actually not a virtue, which is why we're at an inflection point. Because this may be the most potentially powerful period presented to brands, where media has exponential scalability if what you say lands. Truly great content inevitably commands the demands from the masses, because we are in an age of infinite leverage. You create a piece of content once and it can scale forever. An article can be read by unlimited readers. A video can be watched by unlimited viewers. A podcast or song can be listened to by unlimited listeners. You just have to create gold once and the rush will never end. This isn't to tritely trivialize the truth or pretend that building content is easy, because it's not. It still takes time and skill. But if you do it well and do it right, it actually will change your business forever. Because media leverage is today's biggest op. The companies that understand that will ultimately rise to the top, because online, every business is a media company. It's up to you whether you will have the content to accompany your ascension based on your comprehension of its importance. Because if your company has an important thing to say, you must say it. If your company has an important way to help, you must do it. You just need to make sure people know it. And using media leverage to show, not tell, is a key way you'll have access to your blue ocean clientele.
I don't know how loud that is in the microphone, but well done. Yeah, that is packed with info right there. That's like a, I mean, that, how many words is that? That's a lot of words.
I don't know, man.
No, that's super cool. No, that's so amazing. I love that you have such a passion for teaching and sharing information. That's amazing. And what a cool way to do it. I feel like, just like with like cartoons or things like that, you know, sometimes the medium can get people to come to terms with the truth, you know, and so sometimes that helps them, you know, maybe having that conversation face to face would be a little bit more difficult. And when they read the poem, they're like, oh yeah, like that's true. Like I really have no idea what I want to say
Totally.
because of the way it's presented. You know what I mean? It's just, it's good. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was cool. So final question, because I know we're wrapping up here and I want to be conscious of your time. You know, this is, you know, what I hope is this is a relevant question for a lot of people, you know, whether or not you're creating content or otherwise, but let's be honest, there's a ton of content creators out here in the world. So this will be hopefully really helpful for them. You know, Australia is probably one of the most locked down places right now with COVID, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think you guys can like go to the bathroom without permission there.
That's true. We got surveillance cameras everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. Pretty intense. So outside of like whatever, how people feel about that, that's not what this question's about. The question is, how does someone like you in a media company actually make progress and make work and do all that stuff despite the atmosphere that we're in? Because it's a real challenge. Like, I mean, literally, even in the US a year ago, like, you know, it was like, you know, I could have committed social suicide if I had asked too many people to do a podcast in person. You know what I mean? And you know what I mean? And so like, and you guys are even more so. So it's like, how does someone go about creating content, reaching new people, and creating media when media is such like an in-person, at least for video, is such an in-person thing, and so on and so forth? How have you guys navigated that in your business?
Yeah, totally. So the first thing is, like, a lot of our clients, actually most of my clients are in the States, right? So,
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah. Most of my clients are overseas. But in terms of like, it's been the last 2 years, really, year and a half, actually time dilates with what's going on right now. It's crazy. But yeah, for me, it's really around like a deepened empathy for what people actually need right now.
Okay.
Right. So number one is that. And number two is just like, it is adaptability, because it's like, yeah, we can't do in-person videos anymore. Like well, at least in Australia for a very long time.
Sure.
All of this year, like that's not going to be going ahead. And then the health protocols that are going to be in place moving forwards after that, no one really knows. That's a kind of an unknown. And so it's like, okay, well, if you really understand the first principles behind all things, it's like, why do people create videos in the first place, right? Like, because it's able to communicate more emotion. It's able, you know, communicate more things outside just, you know, words, right? And there's more, emotional information or emotional data through it, right? And it's more engaging that way. So it's like, okay, well, what can you still do that's emotionally engaging, that can communicate more emotions, that are things that other people aren't doing, right? And so, yeah, maybe the videos aren't necessarily going to be, you know, the super well-produced ones that are in studio right now, but what's a way that we can really, when everyone's zigging, how can we zag? Right.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the stuff that we do, and people will see it come out from this podcast as well. It's like, yeah, we just create a lot of really engaging trailers, create the equivalent of kind of like movie trailers for content. And so, yeah, that's just one thing.
Like motion graphics kind of stuff, just to be like more specific. Okay.
Yeah, we do animation stuff, but it's also how we cut up information and cut up, like from this podcast, like I'm sure both of us are going to have a lot of content for us to be repurposing and sharing with each other as well. But it's like, how do we make that super engaging, right? So previously, maybe it's like super, well lit, nice studio lights and all this stuff. But maybe we don't have that, or maybe we have it in our own studios at home. But really, we have 2 Zoom cameras and 2 Zoom footages. So how do we make that really interesting, right? So yeah, for me, like especially for a lot of the content creators out there and a lot of people who are creating in this space and they're already in the industry, it's like, okay, well, really niche down and understand, okay, what's a target demographic right now that need help with content creation because everybody's super saturated and going one way, and then think of something super unique for them and just go the other way. And again, for me, the whole philosophy is always show, don't tell. So it's like, instead of asking them up front, like, can you pay me for this? How about you just create something that's super unique for them, give it to them and say, here's proof of what I can do for you, and go that way. Because when you're asking for a lot in a climate like this, like it's really hard because, I'm super empathetic. A lot of people, financially have been struck by the situation worldwide, whether it's small businesses or anything like that. So when everybody's actually then asking for something, like asking for business and all this stuff, it's like, it just changes the dynamic, and it just communicates a lack of empathy and a lack of understanding of what the climate actually is right now. It's not like it's a more depressive climate in terms of, budgets are being shrunk, right? Not expanded necessarily. So it's just to be super conscious of that and just understand, when you're going into a market, when everyone's going one way, how can you go a different way and just bring that unique flavor to it?
Totally. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Man, we covered a lot. How to position your business, like how to develop a personality of it, personal branding, the whole 9 yards, PR. We covered a lot. So I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm sure anyone listening can get quite a lot out of this. So I really appreciate all the value that you brought this way. So thank you very much. For people who are looking to get a hold of you to learn more about what you do, please share away, let people know where they can find you, and we'll be sure to include your information in the show notes or comments below, whether it's audio or video. So if you could share that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, amazing. So our website is inflection.media. We're Inflection Media on all socials. So check us out on YouTube, on LinkedIn in particular. We post a lot there, and Instagram as well. We've just relaunched and just revamped all of our socials, and we're just going live with our new content. And so, check us out there, follow us there, and looking forward to meeting and connecting with anybody who feels called.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you walk and your talk is constant.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Death to Vanilla podcast. Now, if you made it this far, I'm guessing you probably heard something that was inspiring or helpful, and we would love to hear about it. So if you could drop that information in the comments or shoot me an email, steven@burkhartcreativeagency.com. That would go a long way to helping us choose guests and create content that really bring you value. Now, Instagram is my favorite social media platform, but I'm sure you have yours. And so we encourage you to find us on your favorite platform so that you have a chance to learn more about marketing that can help you out. Now, they say a rising tide rises all boats. So we ask that you would like, subscribe, and follow us, so that way the traffic that we get to our channel helps all of the guests that have been on. Our traffic is their traffic, and that helps everybody out, and it's super easy to do. So if you could rate us, like us, add us, follow us, whatever you need to do to help us out, that would go a long way. So we appreciate you and hope to catch you on the next episode of the Death to Vanilla podcast.